1 year from now, you will stop explaining yourself to people who never deserved an explanation. You will sit in a room where someone says something cruel about you, and you will feel the old urge rise in your throat, the need to correct them, to defend the record, to make sure they understand who you really are, and then you will let it pass. You will say nothing. And for the first time in your life, the silence will feel like power instead of defeat. This is the story of how you get there. It starts long before that room, in 100 smaller rooms you've already lived through, where you handed your power to people who never wanted proof of your worth, only a reaction. Think about the last time someone misjudged you. Maybe a coworker assumed you were lazy when you were carrying 3 projects in silence. Maybe a family member decided you were selfish because you said no once. Think about what you did next. You explained. You laid out the facts, the context, the reasons, hoping that if they just understood, they would change their mind. They didn't. They rarely do. Because most people who judge you quickly didn't arrive at that judgment through evidence. They arrived at it through comfort. It's easier for them to believe a simple story about you than a complicated truth, and your explanation doesn't break that story. It feeds it. Every sentence you offer becomes proof, in their mind, that you cared enough to defend yourself, which to them means you had something to hide. Remember the text message you typed out at midnight once, 3 paragraphs long, trying to make someone understand a decision they'd already condemned hours earlier? You read it back, edited a word, sent it, and watched the reply come back short and cold anyway, because the length of your effort meant nothing against the speed of their conclusion. That message cost you an hour of your night and probably a piece of your sleep. And it changed nothing about how that person saw you, because people who've already decided aren't reading for information, they're reading for confirmation, and your paragraph gave them plenty. Explaining yourself costs more than people realize. It doesn't cost you the argument, it costs you something underneath the argument, a kind of quiet authority you can't get back by winning. Watch 2 people argue about something small, a missed deadline, a misunderstanding at dinner, a comment taken out of context. The one who explains the most, who lists every reason, every circumstance, every excuse, is the one who looks smaller by the end of it, even if every word they said was true. The one who says only what's necessary and stops, walks away looking like they were never threatened in the first place. And that's simply how status works in a room. The person who needs to be believed loses leverage the moment they start needing it. There's an old idea, older than self-help, older than therapy language, that shows up in monasteries and military codes and royal courts across centuries. Never complain, never explain. Different cultures phrased it differently, but the principle stayed the same. Explaining every decision invites endless debate, and complaining about the weight of command reveals that the weight has become too heavy to carry. The phrase isn't about secrecy. It's about preserving the kind of presence that makes people trust you without needing a speech. Kings used it, generals used it, quiet fathers who never raised their voice used it without ever naming it, and their children grew up believing those men were simply strong, never knowing the strength was a discipline they'd built sentence by sentence, refusal by refusal. Consider how this played out in courts where a single sentence in the wrong direction could end a career or a life. Advisors who survived decades of shifting power weren't the ones with the cleverest arguments. They were the ones who learned to answer a dangerous question with the fewest possible words, because every extra sentence was a thread an enemy could pull later. A diplomat asked about a rival's failure might say only that the matter was unfortunate, nothing more, while everyone around them filled 3 minutes with opinions that would be quoted against them for years. History remembers the quiet ones as wise. It rarely remembers what they actually thought, because they made sure of that, and the mystery itself became part of their authority. Here's something most people never notice about complaining, and it isn't a moral failing, it's a mechanism. Every time you complain, your brain logs the event as evidence that complaining works, because it gets attention, sympathy, or relief, even for a moment. The brain doesn't care if the relief is real or just a temporary dopamine hit from being heard. It only cares that the behavior got a result, so it reinforces the loop, and you find yourself looking for the next thing to complain about almost without noticing, because your mind has quietly learned that complaining is a reliable source of connection. Researchers who study rumination have found that talking through a grievance repeatedly doesn't drain the grievance, it deepens the neural pathway associated with it, which means the more you explain your pain to people, the more practiced your brain becomes at finding pain to explain. Picture a young monk in a mountain monastery, maybe 19 years old, who is wrongly blamed by an older monk for breaking a ceremonial bowl he never touched. He knows the truth, and the words to clear his name sit ready in his mouth. But he has learned something the others haven't. The bowl doesn't matter, and being seen as truthful in this exact moment doesn't matter either, because what matters is whether he can let an untrue thing exist about him without flinching. He bows and walks away in silence. 3 years later, the older monk who blamed him finds the real culprit by accident and never offers a word of apology, but by then it doesn't matter because the young monk's calm in that one moment already convinced the entire monastery to trust him with harder things. Nobody had to defend him after that. His silence had already done it. You're probably thinking that sounds noble in a story, but impossible in your actual life, where you have a boss who needs context, a partner who deserves honesty, a friend who's owed the full truth. You're right, and this is where most people misunderstand the discipline completely. Never complain, never explain is a rule against performing your pain for people who didn't earn the right to witness it and who wouldn't use it to help you anyway, not a rule against communication itself. There's a difference between telling your partner what hurt you because the relationship needs that honesty to survive, and telling a stranger on the internet why you deserve sympathy because your ego needs the attention to survive. One builds something, the other spends something. Confusing the two is how good people end up emotionally bankrupt in front of audiences who never cared. Somewhere in your life right now, you're explaining yourself to someone who already decided. A relative who thinks they know exactly why your life looks the way it does. A group chat that formed an opinion about your choices the moment you made them and hasn't updated since. An ex who narrates your decisions to mutual friends with total confidence about motives they never asked you about. You keep sending paragraphs into that space, hoping one more detail will finally land, finally change the verdict, and it won't. Because the verdict was built on a story they like better than the truth, not on evidence. The moment you understand that, something in your chest loosens, because you stop preparing arguments for a jury that already left the room. Stop and notice what happens in your body the next time you feel the urge to defend yourself to someone who's already judged you. There's a tightness in the chest, a rush of words forming before you've even decided to speak, a feeling that if you don't say something right now, the misunderstanding will become permanent. That feeling is real, but it's lying to you about the stakes. Almost nothing said in the next 10 seconds will undo a judgment that took someone years of bias to build. What you're actually protecting in that moment isn't your reputation, it's your ego's need to be understood immediately. And that need, when you feed it constantly, becomes a leash that other people learn to pull whenever they want a reaction out of you. Notice how often the people who provoke you the most know exactly which sentence will make you start explaining yourself. They've learned your trigger the same way a fisherman learns where the fish gather. Not through malice necessarily, sometimes just through repetition, through watching what worked the last 10 times they pushed that same button. Every time you bite, you confirm the location of the hook for next time. Stop biting for long enough, and the hook stops being useful to them, and they move on to someone else who still reacts, because manipulation is lazy at its core and always travels toward the easiest target in the room. The twist most people miss entirely sits right here. The less you explain, the more people project their own theories onto you, and you'd think that's dangerous, letting other people fill in the blanks of your story without your input. It is dangerous for your ego, because some of those theories will be unflattering. But it's the opposite of dangerous for your power, because uncertainty is the one thing human attention can't look away from. A person who explains everything becomes fully known, and fully known things stop being interesting. A person who explains nothing keeps a kind of gravity around them, because the mind is wired to keep watching what it can't fully solve. This is why the quietest person in almost every room you've ever been in was the one people watched the most, even if nobody could say exactly why. Real discipline still allows love and honesty, and it never asks you to punish the people who care about you with silence, because that's a different problem entirely. The kind where withholding becomes a weapon instead of a discipline. The line between the two is simple. Discipline keeps explanation away from people who'd use it against you, while cruelty keeps connection away from people who need it to feel safe with you. If you're protecting your peace from a stranger's judgment, that's strength. If you're starving someone who loves you of basic honesty because you enjoy the power of their confusion, that's something else, and no script about silence should ever talk you into becoming that. Nature carries a version of this too, if you know where to look. A wolf that's been wounded in a fight doesn't limp back to the pack and announce the injury to anyone who'll listen. It retreats, heals in isolation, and returns only once it can move like nothing happened. Because in that world, broadcasting weakness invites exactly the kind of attention that turns weakness into death. Humans aren't wolves, and your friends aren't predators waiting to exploit you. But the instinct that tells a wounded animal to go quiet instead of loud is older than language, and some part of you still carries it even in rooms that feel completely safe. Something this video found in you might be sitting heavy right now, carried quietly for years. And that's not an accident either, and it's worth pausing with, rather than scrolling past, because the next part is where it gets harder to hear and more useful to know. Let's go back to the room from the beginning, the one a year from now, where someone says something cruel about you, and you say nothing. What actually happens in that room isn't peaceful, not at first. There's a beat of tension, while everyone waits for your reaction, because they've learned to expect one. When it doesn't come, something shifts in the air, subtle but unmistakable, the kind of shift you feel in your stomach before you can name it in your head. The person who insulted you starts talking faster, filling the space your silence left open, because silence makes people uncomfortable in a way shouting never does. They begin explaining themselves instead, justifying why they said what they said, and within a minute, the entire weight of the room has moved off you and onto them without you lifting a finger. Silence does something here that should genuinely surprise you if you've never tried it. It doesn't just protect you. It redistributes power in the room to whoever can hold it longest. Watch any negotiation, any courtroom, any family argument that's gotten too loud, and you'll notice the person who stays quiet the longest ends up controlling the pace of everything that happens next, because everyone else is reacting and they're the only one choosing. You've spent years thinking explanation was generosity, a gift you gave people so they could understand you better. It's often the opposite. It's a transfer of control from you to whoever's judging you, handed over the second you start talking faster than you're thinking. Negotiators are trained for exactly this reason, to let a silence stretch far past the point where it feels comfortable, because the other side almost always breaks first and fills it with information they didn't intend to give away. Skilled interrogators use the same principle, not through pressure, but through patience, letting a room sit in quiet until the person across from them can't stand it anymore and starts talking just to end the discomfort. You don't need a badge or a negotiating table to use this. You need only the willingness to let a pause exist a few seconds longer than your instinct tells you is polite, and watch what the other person reveals trying to fill it. A soldier in one unit got blamed collectively for a failure that was actually caused by bad orders from above. Every other soldier in that unit spent the debrief explaining, pointing at maps, listing reasons, defending their individual choices in front of officers who'd already decided someone needed to be blamed. One soldier said almost nothing, answering direct questions with short, true answers and offering nothing extra. 6 months later, when the same officers needed someone for a position that required absolute trust under pressure, they remembered the soldier who didn't flinch and didn't grovel. Everyone in that room had been innocent, but he was the only one who hadn't performed his innocence for an audience. And people remember the performance far longer than they remember the truth behind it. Now here's where the loop closes, the one we opened back near the start of this. Remember the question of why the people who've suffered the most often say the least. It's not because their pain is smaller. It's because somewhere along the way they learned what you're learning right now, that pain explained to the wrong audience gets diluted into entertainment for people who were never going to carry any of its weight, while pain protected in silence stays whole enough to actually transform you. The loudest grief in the room is rarely the deepest. The deepest grief usually moves through a person quietly, doing its real work far from any audience, which is exactly why the people who carry the most often look, from the outside, like they're carrying nothing at all. Imagine a parent who loses a child and somehow returns to work within weeks, calm enough that co-workers whisper about how unaffected they seem. Nobody in that office sees the 20 minutes that parent spends sitting in a parked car before walking inside, learning exactly how much grief to let surface during daylight hours and how much to carry home in the dark where it belongs. People mistake that discipline for coldness because they've never had to build it themselves. The truth is simpler. The office doesn't get to witness something that large, because witnessing isn't the same as understanding, and most rooms only have the capacity for witnessing. Life is going to test this in the next few weeks, whether you plan for it or not, because it doesn't wait for you to finish a video before it sends you the practice round. Someone is going to misread you. Someone is going to assume the worst version of your motives and say it out loud, maybe to your face, maybe behind your back, where you'll hear about it secondhand. You'll feel the old pull, the need to set the record straight immediately, to make sure the wrong story doesn't get to live in anyone's head unchallenged. And in that exact second, you'll have a choice that has nothing to do with right or wrong and everything to do with where your power is allowed to live. You can hand it to them in the form of an explanation they didn't earn, or you can keep it and let the discomfort of being misunderstood do something that arguing never could. Letting yourself be misunderstood for a while is not the same as letting yourself be erased. There's a difference between someone forming a wrong impression that fades on its own once your actions speak louder over time, and someone actively rewriting your story in ways that cost you real things. A job, a relationship, your safety. This isn't a rule that asks you to stay silent while you're genuinely harmed. It's a rule that asks you to stop treating every small misjudgment like an emergency that requires your testimony. Most of what people get wrong about you will correct itself the moment they watch how you actually live. And no speech you give them now will move that timeline faster than your own consistency will. Watch how a river handles a stone someone throws into it. The water doesn't argue with the stone or rush to explain why the splash doesn't define it. It simply keeps moving, and within seconds, the surface looks exactly like it did before, because the river's identity was never in question to begin with. A person who knows who they are reacts to a false accusation the same way, with a brief disturbance that smooths itself out almost immediately, while a person still unsure of themselves treats every stone like a flood, because uncertainty turns small disruptions into proof that needs immediate correction. Look at the people you respect most in your own life, and you'll notice they rarely earned it through speeches, not celebrities, not strangers online, the actual people you've watched up close. They earned it through pattern, through showing up the same way, enough times that you stopped needing them to tell you who they were, because you'd already seen it. That's the entire secret hiding inside never complain, never explain. It's not a personality trait you perform in the moment of conflict. It's a track record you build in the months nobody's watching, so that by the time conflict comes, You don't need a single word, because your history is already speaking for you. A man who spent 5 years showing up the same way, steady on his worst days and his best, doesn't need a single sentence to defend himself when someone finally tries to slander him in front of people who've watched those 5 years unfold. Studies on trust and credibility hold a strange fact that explains why this entire approach works, even though it feels backwards at first. Researchers studying how juries and hiring panels form impressions have found that people who over-explain are consistently rated as less trustworthy than people who answer briefly and stop, even when the content of what they said was identical. The brain reads excess explanation as a kind of effort, and effort, in this specific context, gets misread as concealment. You'd think more words would mean more honesty. The opposite is true often enough that it should change how you talk the next time you're tempted to fill a silence just because it feels uncomfortable. Expect this discipline to get harder before it gets easier, and know that now, instead of discovering it the hard way, the first few times you choose silence over explanation, it will feel like losing. You'll watch someone walk away believing something untrue about you, and every instinct in your body will scream that you abandoned yourself by not correcting them. That feeling is real, and it will pass because it isn't actually grief over the misunderstanding, it's withdrawal from the habit of needing to be understood by everyone, immediately, all the time. Like any habit you're breaking, the absence of the old behavior feels like loss before it starts feeling like freedom. Everything closes now. The loop on the future you saw at the very beginning. That version of you, standing in the room a year from now, saying nothing while someone insults you, still feels every word. The calm comes from somewhere else. He's finally stopped needing the room to agree with his version of events in order to know it's true. That's the actual transformation hiding inside this entire idea. Never complain, never explain is about becoming whole enough that what people think of you stops deciding who you are, not about turning numb to what they think. If any part of this has been sitting heavy in your chest while you listen, that's worth paying attention to rather than brushing off. And if you've got people in your life who are still handing their power away one explanation at a time, this might be the video that finally gives them the language for what they've been doing wrong. Share it with the one person who needs to hear it before they burn out trying to be understood by everyone. Soon, sooner than you think, someone will try to provoke a reaction out of you and get silence instead, and in that silence, they will meet a version of you they don't recognize and can't read. That's not coldness. It's the version of you that finally stopped paying for other people's comfort with your own dignity. The one who no longer performs his pain or his innocence for anyone watching. He simply lives and lets the living speak. And somewhere down the line, without a single speech, the people who doubted him will watch him stand in a room, untouched by their words, and finally understand what they couldn't see before. Some things are too true to need defending. You were never required to make everyone understand you. You were only ever required to stop forgetting who you are long enough to need them to.